Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of HR Tech Chat, the video podcast. And with me today, we have a guest who was with us previously for another episode in late 2022. It is Jamie Aitken of Betterworks, where she is VP of HR Transformation. Welcome.
Thanks, Brent. Great to be back and chatting with you again.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we had a really great conversation last time, and we'll put a link to that one in this one when it does go live. But BetterWorks does, performance. Hesitate to say management, performance enablement. This new progressive type of modern approach to performance management, which is called performance enablement. Um, and we're here today to kind of talk about, why modern organizations need modern performance management and how to get there. So maybe we could start off with something pretty, fundamental, just to kind of give our viewers their bearings. What is modern performance management? How does it differ from, the old ways, the conventional, traditional approaches?
Okay, well, let's start with the traditional approach that's, over 100 years old, invented by the US military to manage performance. As you know, I've been in HR for my entire career, 25 plus years, and that has been the norm for many, many organizations for a very long time. And we started to see it shift a little while ago, but I think the pace of that shift to performance enablement is certainly speeding up. So let's go back to traditional performance management, which is classically twice a year. You have your you set your goals, your career goals up at the front of the year with your manager. You might have a mid-year review where you're talking about either just specifically your career goals or a little bit of both. And then you have that year-end plus new year where you're talking about what you've done for the past year. So there's a bunch of problems with that as far as we see. First of all, the idea that if you establish a goal in January, that is maybe going to be the only thing you're focusing on throughout the 12 months is, I think, I think it could pretty much say, certainly over the last 2-3 years, I don't know that any of us have been able to have that kind of stability. The world's changed fast. Organizations need the agility to pivot. And also projects themselves can last 1 month, 3 months, 5 months. They don't last the whole, year. So the idea that, you set it and forget it at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year, your manager looks at you and says, okay, let's talk about that goal that may or may not be relevant to what you've been working on throughout the year, because we've had to adjust. And also, I'm going to try as best as I can as your manager to remember all of the strengths that you brought to the table, all of the obstacles you were overcome. Probably not. They're probably, they're probably thinking, maybe 2-3 months behind, if that. So it's laden with recency bias.
Mm.
And the notion of where HR plays in this in a traditional way, because, and I've been in this situation where entire HR teams spend the time at the end of the year. Their goal is, did we complete the process? How many performance reviews were completed? How many development plans were completed? And that's the metrics that they were going with. Again, very compliance focused, HR as a police, and literally chasing. I worked with one organization where for, the last 2 weeks before the process ended, they were literally going from office to office, collecting manual paper docs of, so that they could then check off the box that, yes, it's complete.
Wow.
So that's
Wow.
old school, right?
Yeah.
And By the way, the research has been telling us for years it doesn't actually affect performance in any significant way. It just ends up making everybody agitated and demoralized, managers and employees alike, right? So that's the old way. And
Can
many
I just
organizations,
interject for a second before we talk about the new way? Because I learned something today. I did not, unless I forgot, and someone told me previously, I didn't know it was actually developed by the US military.
Yeah, we write about it in the book. The CEO and I, Doug Dennerlein, and I just wrote a book about it, and we have a whole section on, where this came from. So if you imagine the mindset of that, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to what we're talking about as it relates to performance, which is performance enablement. So not I'm going to micromanage you. I'm assuming that it's a hierarchical top-down kind
Mm,
of manage the human resources in an organization, but rather if we've been putting on posters for the billion years and annual reports that people are our most important assets, then why can't we make the jump to say, well, if they're our most important assets, let's spend the year having multiple conversations about what they're working on, what they're trying to achieve. Is it still aligned? If so, fantastic. How can I, as your boss,
mm,
help get rid of anything that's getting in the way of you achieving that? By the way, what is it that you as an individual want to accomplish in your own career, in your own development, and how can I help you get those resources? So
mhm,
it's a completely different mindset that comes into play, which is much more engaging for employees.
mm,
And for managers, the manager experience now goes from something I have to do to I'm actually giving support to have a high performing team to each member of my team.
mm.
So massive difference.
Yeah.
And why is it important that we should be doing it? Well, I mean, if you think about it, better engaged employees,
Mhm,
stronger, capable, competent managers, being able to have the coaching sessions that they need to being able to have those frequent conversations. And one other point on this before I finish off on this, one of the questions I get when it gets to continuous performance management is from a manager experience. Oh gosh, wait a minute. You're telling me that I need to have more conversations and more feedback? And what we're not saying is it's that burdensome tax that old way of doing it is. This is very lightweight. It's in the flow of work.
mm.
It's not something that is considered a tax to the employees or
Yeah.
the managers. In fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because this isn't about shoehorning it into the process or forcing it into things. It's about actually. Well, I know we want to talk about this too. This idea of reducing friction, right, in the
Absolutely.
workplace. Yeah, and how you can reduce friction in the performance assessment um, process I guess by making it more about enablement and about frequent conversations again in the flow of work. A couple of things that just pop out for me, you know, just kind of echo or sort of underscore a couple of things that you said. You're absolutely right. It's I've thought about this that we have this tendency or this inclination to think about things in annual cadence, right? Oh, it just makes sense, at first blush. You say, yeah, we should do it every year, once a year, or and maybe there's the thinking that well, this is just the performance, a review. This isn't, obviously the manager and their direct reports are having multiple conversations over the course of the year with their projects and all that. But so on the surface, there's a thin veneer of intuitiveness, I think,
Yeah.
when you think about sort of the annual review, the old performance management process. But when you dig in a little bit more, it's actually very counterintuitive and counterproductive. So yeah,
Totally right. I mean, just think about just let's forget about it as an HR process now and think about it just in terms of the relationships you have as a human with other humans, whether it be your partner, whether it be your sibling? Do you actually sit down once a year and have a review of your interactions? Do you give a review of the health of the right? Like it
No.
doesn't make sense. It's not how humans interact.
Yeah, no, it's not, absolutely. And you know what's funny also, is it's just also, it's almost as if the technology that's existed up till recently, when I say recently, in the past few short years, that technology has almost sort of been a factor in our annualized thinking around performance management. There's better technology now that enables frequent, sort of effortless, frictionless interaction that did not exist previously. And so there wasn't really a way from a technological standpoint, and certainly not from a paper pushing standpoint, to support this modern, progressive approach to performance enablement.
Well, I mean, I'll say as an early adopter of cloud technology around this, frankly, I don't know even if there was a buying inclination to challenge what the process was at that point.
Mm,
We were so thrilled that we could take a very heavy manual process, and when I mean manual, I mean, print out a form and fill it in. We were just absolutely wowed by the idea that that could now be done in the cloud.
yeah.
That was huge. So I don't know that HR or the organizations that were looking at those solutions at the time were demanding that they be anything other than the transformation. Then was take their existing process and digitize it, and that was a leap, that was a big leap. But of
Mhm.
course, there's been a lot of things that have happened since those early days that have, I think, pushed the innovation envelope. And I would call out Adobe in particular as one of the first to really make a bold step to say, you know what, this process is stupid. Let's blow it up and make it something more humane and in the flow of work. And I think the in the flow of work is certainly an element that Betterworks has a differentiation, which is, in a nutshell, because I think of in the flow of work in a bunch of different ways. From a technology perspective, it's the idea that I don't have to go from where I am in my job, i.e., if I'm in Outlook or Teams or whatever the case may be, pull myself out of that, shift over, log into a separate portal where I go and do my HR stuff, right? So
Yeah.
that's the old way. And now it's, now that's it. There's now that is now in the flow of work, meaning I can do all of the work that I need to in terms of, feedback recognition, looking at my goals, etc., where I am, Outlook,
Mm,
Teams, Gmail, whatever. So that from a tech perspective, that's a good thing. But
mm,
I think also so removing the friction in that process is good. But I think the other element to it is kind of what we were talking about before, which is there's also friction in the process if I'm only meeting with you once or twice a year for this performance discussion,
mm.
right? Because I'm not going to be, it's not like I'm going to be clicking my heels with excitement that I know that that conversation is coming up. If you, Brent, are my manager, right? Like I'm going to have some trepidation, which creates friction. There might be some awkwardness because we're not doing it frequently enough for it to be a natural trust-based conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Oh,
the flow of work is two things for me, or the
yeah.
removing of friction. Apologies.
That makes a lot of sense. You're absolutely correct. And the thing from the technological side, the real innovation, at least from the outside looking in, to me seems to be that ability of the software to capture what's happening, no matter where it's occurring elsewhere in that employer's software ecosystem. Whether it's in Office 365 or maybe in, I don't know, Slack, or I'm just throwing some stuff out there.
Right, or in Salesforce, try asking a salesperson, who's really, very singularly focused on, doing their job in sales, ask them to double update their goals in a separate portal, when in fact, if you're updating in Salesforce, which is where you live as a salesperson, it's going to automatically be captured. And then the other piece to it too, which I think is a big shift, is that um, the idea of feedback and recognition is now expanding rapidly to not just, I want to hear what you, Brent, my boss, has to say, but I also want to get feedback from people I'm collaborating on projects with. For perhaps, another manager that was running a project that I was on, I want to get that feedback too. I want to be able to get that so that I can grow in my career. And I want the ability to do shout outs. I want to be able to give recognition and get recognition, and not just from one other person in my organization. No
Yeah.
offense, Brent, but you're just my manager. I want to hear from a bunch of people, because I'm keenly interested in that. And we know, in particular for the younger generations, feedback is a very important aspect.
Well, it's a dopamine hit too, a positive one, and so to be able to make that as possible as possible
I know what
is
you're saying.
is a good thing. Thinking about HR's role, right? And being able to kind of transform HR in a sense. We hear a lot about moving from operational to strategic HCM in the parlance of 360 Insights. Here at our firm, we talk about concrete and abstract HCM, sort of the transactional, highly measurable, quantifiable stuff that can be automated versus that more aspirational, inspirational stuff, such as employee sentiment, having an impact on that, optimizing the employee experience, building an employer culture, and ultimately a powerful employer brand. How does modern performance management support this progression from operational to strategic HCM, or however someone wants to characterize those two things?
Well, if you think about HR, and use the example that I mentioned before about people, in HR physically running around to different office spaces, looking for paper forms and collecting them and sticking them in, cabinets someplace where they'll never be seen again, right?
Yeah.
If that's, you're not going to have the opportunity to be strategic if you are doing that kind of work. Like there's just only so many hours in the day. And so that transactional stuff, as you start moving with technology away from that transactional stuff, you have the room, you have the breathing room to actually start making correlations on, by the way, more data than you had before. Because before I was just looking at PMP completion. Well, what does that tell you? Does it tell you anything at all about, did it affect performance? How's employee engagement? Like any of that stuff? No, it doesn't. How good are our managers at coaching their team? It doesn't give us any of that insight. But by doing it more frequently, by doing it more frequently, you're going to have more data. You're going to have more ability to support the organization from an HR partner perspective strategically by saying, whoa, you know what? There's parts of our organization that are really, doing a great job at enabling performance, but there's others that are falling short. How do we then strategically support that part of the organization so that we can actually help performance in those areas? This to me is, and ultimately, and how does that performance start correlating with business performance, right?
Yeah.
That is the realm of strategic HR.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely spot on that. To me, strategic HR is about having access to combinable data that's current and easily accessible. Being able to make sense of that, translate it into information, or interpret it for organizational leadership, so that HR is seen as strategic, right? HR just doesn't think of itself as strategic, but that it is strategic. And then also being able to having the wherewithal, because of that information at your disposal, to be a coach, to be and a mentor and a partner to any line manager anywhere who is,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And I think that's a really critical part as well, because what I'm seeing more and more and more is the whole notion of, and we've been talking about employee experience for a while now, and I think we're doing a good job of focusing on that. And what's now coming up is the manager experience. And specifically, when
Mm,
you think about how critical a role managers have to play as it relates to this topic and process, the idea that they are magically going to become better managers of their talent, right? Talent managers, that they're immediately going to become better coaches, is a fallacy. You need to be able to build it over time. And I like to say frequency creates competency.
mm,
With the idea that if you're doing it often enough, you're going to get better at it. But you also have to have a strategic HR person who's going to coach you as a coach, right? That
mhm.
builds up that manager experience so that they feel comfortable and confident going into these conversations and feedback discussions with their employees and giving really valuable feedback, right? Not just a check in the box. It's a completely different mindset.
Yeah, it is. And you're absolutely right. Just kind of throwing this in front of a manager and expecting them to become a leader, right? Or to become a better manager is, you know, that's leaving a lot to chance.
Yeah.
But you are giving them a much greater chance of becoming a better manager if they have these tools before them. That's what's really, that's to me is sort of the duality of that. Or that might not be the right word, but we'll go with it anyway. Is that,
Well, but yeah.
yeah, I
Sorry, go.
mean, we have this ability to. There was no way with the old process, the old conventional or traditional approach to performance review. There was no way that that was in any way going to or cultivate better leaders, right?
Right. And this way you're actually the mind, one of the mindset changes is as a manager, it is my job to coach, support, and enable my team members,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to HR made me do it, to be blunt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're doing is you're optimizing that capability within your organization. And by optimizing it, you're optimizing the performance of those teams,
Mm-hmm.
period.
Yeah, yeah.
Why we haven't been doing this, I don't know. I'm
Me neither.
excited that we're doing it now. And I think a lot of HR people are excited about it as well. It's just, it takes a minute. It takes a minute. And we spend a lot of time around the change management aspects, because transformation requires a lot of change and sustainability and sustainment in the adoption. So this isn't, like I said, this isn't you flip the switch and everything magically happens. You need to be committed to this. But I think I'm not talking that it takes a decade or it does. It's not like it's a long, long journey. But don't mistake that your go live is actually going to magically make everything change. You need to be very thoughtful about how you introduce that change over time so that people feel comfortable and and not overwhelmed.
To me, it's a way. You're absolutely right, and to me, the word is intentionality. If HR
Yeah.
approaches it with intentionality, then there's a snowball's chance, and where for it to more than that for it to work out. It,
Yeah.
and this actually goes to a broader concept of HR having, retaining and strengthening its influence. Uh, I would say forging, retaining, and strengthening its influence over the employee experience, right? Because it's certainly not written in stone. It's not carved in granite that HR necessarily must by design innately have a role in the employee experience. I think HR needs to kind of stretch a little bit and make sure that it does. It can have absolutely a very intuitive, um, helpful, facilitative role in it. And to me, modern performance enablement is one of those conduits for that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I completely agree with you because at the end of the day, me walking into the board with, and I'll use the same example. If I walk into a board with a presentation that says, by the way, we had 98% completion on our performance management process this year. All documentation is done. It's a pretty short conversation, right?
Yeah.
And they probably won't give me a slot on the next agenda. If I can go into that same board and say, here's what we're seeing. We're seeing that because of our work in performance enablement, our engagement levels have gone up. Our employees are actually saying that they're willing to go above and beyond in some
Mm,
cases, that they understand the connection and the contribution that they're having to the business objectives, and they understand that alignment. And by the way, productivity is going up. And here are the areas where we've discovered that maybe we need to spend a little bit more time because it's having we see opportunities where we could help increase performance and productivity in a particular division if we spent a little bit more time there.
mm.
I'm pretty sure we'd be invited to another meeting.
Yeah, or another example, there might be a way for us to avert a potential, exodus of staff in this particular division over here. If we do X, Y, and Z right now, this is what we hypothesize, this sort of stuff. And this actually is a great segue into this idea that, there are strategic benefits to the organization of
Yeah,
having a modern approach to performance, call it management or enablement, whatever you want to call it. And you describes a number of them, increased productivity, greater employee engagement, greater employee satisfaction. Also, a lot of these things are, they don't necessarily, you can't you can't trace a line from them to a greater bottom line, to an increase in the bottom line,
I hope
but
we get there. I hope we
yeah.
get there. I really do. I
Trying to
really.
argue against that, though, I mean, you have to be crazy. What are some of what are some of the strategic costs or losses for an organization that fails that just doesn't take it seriously to modernize this approach to performance?
Well, I mean, I think we've been talking in the news. Everybody's talking about, this notion. Well, quiet quitting has kind of calmed down a bit, but all this notion that you're not really. There's retention issues
Mm,
with the way that we're doing things now, right? There's retention issues. So attrition is a cost. It's a big cost. I think we're actually going to get to the point where employees during their interviews are going to be asking the question, how do you manage my performance? And they're going to be voting with their feet if they hear an answer like, oh, we don't do the traditional approach. Here's what you can expect. You can expect quarterly or monthly conversations with your manager and others around, your career path, and you're going to be able to see your alignment with what the you get the drift here.
yeah.
I think we're going to get to the point where employees are going to be expecting that and not, or choosing not to work in places that don't support them that way.
Oh, I think you're absolutely correct about that, and it's really interesting. You think about the way, to me, this is intriguing, and how modern performance management, for instance, it's really a factor in sort of swiping away this, or knocking down the silos
Totally.
of, sort of the conventional, traditional, um, you know, domains of talent management. You have performance management, you have learning and career development, you have maybe compensation, management, success and planning, these sorts of things. You mentioned career development, it's really tough to have these frequent conversations around performance without talking about career development, without talking about learning, without talking about, um, you know, compensation maybe even, but also, promotions, or like, what is my career path? What's internal hiring look like? And so this it feeds into my, and I'm certainly not the only one, but this my idea that, it occurred to me that it's all kind of becoming talent management, if you even want to call it that. It's all becoming one thing. It's no longer the sum of its parts. It's all one thing. It's happening very fluidly all at once, holistically.
Totally. I mean, I remember having this discussion, gosh, 15 years ago. Um, we were talking about the manager experience around performance management and succession. And my argument to the room of HR people is, you understand that for the manager, it's the same conversation.
Mm,
We've just put a silo into it that says this is where this process starts and this finishes. But a manager is actually thinking about, how do I think about high performers, and how do I think about intent to risk of loss and all of that. They're not thinking about that at a different time. The walls are blurred around that. And here's an interesting thing too, Brent. I've been having a bunch of conversations over the last month or so, and I sort of set the scenario of, think about times where you've been in an environment where you thrived, and other environments where you were thwarted. Number
mm.
one, I just like the word thwart, but like,
You
I
do.
immediately know where I go with it. Where if I'm in a relationship with my boss and work environment where I don't know, I'm not getting clear direction on what I need to do. I'm not getting an idea that my manager has my back, and
Mhm.
that there is a trust there that they're going to help me through any challenges. If I'm not getting a lot of those things that are, embedded in performance management from an approach perspective, even if I stay,
Mm,
I am going to be second guessing, second guessing myself. I'm going to not feel recognized, so I'll be demoralized. I'm not going to bring my full self to the job, because I'm going to be diminished or thwarted in some way. And it's really interesting to have those conversations, because everybody can tell a story about each of those experiences within their career.
mm,
And gosh, once you sort of sink into that a bit, why
mm.
would you ever want to be in a place where you can't thrive?
It's Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, that might be where we should land today. I love that. Just being able to thrive. If you want to be able to attract top talent, dynamic leaders, and retain dynamic talent and leaders in your organization. Um, you want to give them all the tools, all the modern thinking, and tools for it that are out there, and this is a big piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, fantastic episode of the podcast. Thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us again. And we'll just, let viewers know that there's going to be a third one that's coming up. We won't tell them what the topic is, but it's going to be very interesting. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Always happy to be chatting with you. We always have such great conversations.
Thanks, Jamie.